Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today we're going to read First Canto Srimad-Bhagavatam, Chapter 14, texts 22 to 34. We're covering some ground in this chapter. So we'll chant the verse 22, and then I'll read through the rest of the verses and the purport for 34. Iti chintayatastasya drishta rishtena cetasa ragya pratyagamad brahman yadupurya kapidvajaha iti chintayatastasya drishta rishtena cetasa ragya pratyagamad brahman yadupurya kapidvajaha iti chintayatastasya drishta rishtena cetasa ragya pratyagamad brahman yadupurya kapidvajaha. Okay. Translation. O Brahmana Shaunaka, while Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira, observing the inauspicious signs on the earth at that time, was thus thinking to himself, Arjuna came back from the city of the Yadus, Dvaraka. Text 23. When Arjuna bowed at Yudhiṣṭhira's feet, the king saw that his dejection was unprecedented. His head was down, and tears glided from his lotus eyes. Seeing Arjuna pale due to heartfelt anxieties, the king, remembering the indications of the sage Narada, questioned him in the midst of friends. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira said, My dear brother, please tell me whether our friends and relatives, such as Madhu, Bhoja, Dasharha, Arha, Satvata, Andhaka, and the members of the Yadu family are all passing their days in happiness. Is my respectable grandfather Shurasena in a happy mood? Are my maternal uncle Vasudeva and his younger brothers all doing well? His 7 wives, headed by Devaki, are all sisters. Are they and their sons and daughters-in-law all happy? Are Ugrasena, whose son was the mischievous Kamsa, and his younger brother still living? Are Hridika and his son Kritavarma happy? Are Akrura, Jayanta, Gada, Sharana, and Shatrujit all happy? How is Balaram, the personality of Godhead and the protector of the devotees? How is Pradyumna, the great general of the Vrishni family? Is he happy? And is Aniruddha, the plenary expansion of the personality of Godhead, faring well? All the chieftain sons of Lord Kṛṣṇa, such as Shushena, Charudeshna, Samba, the son of Jambavati, and Rishabha, along with their sons, all doing well? Also, Shrutadeva, Uddhava, and others, Nanda, Sunanda, and other leaders of liberated souls who are constant companions of the Lord, are protected by Lord Balaram and Kṛṣṇa. Are they all doing well in their respective functions? Do they who are eternally bound in friendship with us remember our welfare? And then I'll read the Sanskrit for 34. Bhagavan api govindo brahmanyo bhaktavatsalaha kachit pure sudharmayam sukhamaste suhridvritaha. Is Lord Kṛṣṇa, the personality of Godhead, who gives pleasure to the cows, the senses, and the brahmanas, who is very affectionate toward his devotees, enjoying the pious assembly at Dvarkapuri surrounded by friends? Purport. Here in this particular verse, the Lord is described as Bhagavan, Govinda, Brahmanya, and Bhaktavatsala. He is Bhagavan Svayam, or the original supreme personality of Godhead, full with all opulences, all power, all knowledge, all beauty, all fame, and all renunciation. No one is equal to or greater than him. He is Govinda because he is the pleasure of the cows and the senses. Those who have purified their senses by the devotional service of the Lord can render unto him real service, and thereby derive transcendental pleasure out of such purified senses. Only the impure conditioned living being cannot derive any pleasure from the senses, but being illusioned by false pleasures of the senses, he becomes servant of the senses. Therefore, we need his, Krishna's, protection for our own interest. The Lord is the protector of cows and the Brahminical culture. A society devoid of cow protection and Brahminical culture is not under the direct protection of the Lord, just as the prisoners in the jails are not under the protection of the king, but under the protection of a severe agent of the king. Without cow protection and cultivation of the Brahminical qualities in human society, at least for a section of the members of society, no human civilization can prosper at any length. By Brahminical culture, the development of dormant qualities of goodness, namely truthfulness, equanimity, self-control, forbearance, simplicity, general knowledge, transcendental knowledge, and firm faith in the Vedic wisdom, one can become a Brahmana and thus see the Lord as he is. And after surpassing the Brahminical perfection, one has to become a devotee of the Lord so that his loving affection in the form of proprietor, master, friend, son, and lover can be transcendentally achieved. The stage of a devotee which attracts the transcendental affection of the Lord does not develop unless one has developed the qualities of a Brahmana, as above mentioned. The Lord is inclined to a Brahmana of quality and not of false prestige. Those who are less than a Brahmana by qualification cannot establish any relation with the Lord, just as fire cannot be kindled from the raw earth unless there is wood, although there is a relation between wood and the earth. Since the Lord is all perfect in himself, there could not be any question of his welfare, and Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira refrained from asking this question. He simply inquired about his residential place, Dvarkapuri, where pious men assemble. The Lord stays only where pious men assemble and takes pleasure in their glorifying the supreme truth. Mahārāja Yudhiṣṭhira was anxious to know about the pious men and their pious acts in the city of Dvarka. Om Jnana Timarantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Svaminiti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is a very emotional section of the Bhagavatam. And in this chapter, and especially at the very end of this chapter, we hear for the first time in the Bhagavatam directly about the topic of separation from Kṛṣṇa and Krishna's disappearance from this world. There was, of course, some talk of Krishna's disappearance, even from the very beginning of the Bhagavatam. The sages at Naimisharanya gathered together in the Naimisharanya forest, specifically because they understood that Kṛṣṇa had disappeared from this earth. And so they were trying to surmise how to deal with that situation. They could understand that some calamitous conditions were about to begin with Kṛṣṇa's disappearance. So therefore their question was, what do we do in this situation now that Kṛṣṇa has returned to his own abode along with Dharma? What is there left for those who are in this earth in the age of Kali? Of course, the answer is the Bhagavatam. So Sutta Goswami spoke the Bhagavatam to them, which we're hearing now, of course. Hopefully you knew that. So earlier in the Bhagavatam, we also had the famous prayers of Queen Kunti, and she made those prayers not exactly as she was in separation from Kṛṣṇa. She was making these prayers to Kṛṣṇa, but in anticipation of being separation from Kṛṣṇa, she made these prayers because Kṛṣṇa was about to leave Hastinapur for the last time and return to Dvarka. Kṛṣṇa wouldn't return to Hastinapur again. And so Kunti Devi knew, obviously, Kṛṣṇa was about to leave. And so she was experiencing some emotions of separation, even though she was talking to Kṛṣṇa directly. So the Brihad Bhagavatamrita talks about this, and it explains there that the experience of Vipralambha bhava, which is love and separation, is actually not just limited to when the pure devotees are actually separated from Kṛṣṇa. Sometimes, especially the residents of Vrindavan, and especially the gopis, they experience love of Kṛṣṇa and separation even when Kṛṣṇa is with him or with them directly. So I pose to you all, how do you think, how could that be so? They're with Kṛṣṇa. How can they experience separation from Kṛṣṇa? What do you guys think that means? And we experience this in this world, a reflection of this.
When they blink their eyes.
Well, yeah, that's one example. You beat me to that example.
Maybe the Kali Yuga was already starting.
No, it's because just like, if you're with someone you really love and you know that they're about to depart or you're worried about them leaving you, then even though they might still be with you, right, there's that feeling of emotions that come from separation. Well, I don't know, maybe your relationship with someone is going badly. You might be with them, having some argument, but then you're feeling that oh, this relationship is breaking apart. So there's some feelings of separation. So that's a perverse reflection of the separation that the pure devotees of Kṛṣṇa experience. But it gives us some idea of what it means to experience love of Kṛṣṇa and separation, even when they are with him. And so these feelings of love that the pure devotees have towards Kṛṣṇa, especially the residents of Vrindavan, they especially experience this, Vipralambha, even when they're with Kṛṣṇa. These loving feelings are so strong that even when they are directly with him, just the idea of being separated from him, or the anticipation of being separated from him, causes them to experience a kind of love in separation. And as Daniel beat me to it, the gopis' love for Kṛṣṇa is so intense, and their attachment to being directly with him is so strong that it is described in Srimad-Bhagavatam that the gopis are always experiencing love and separation from Kṛṣṇa. Even when they're with him, they're always experiencing a sense of separation from Kṛṣṇa, and especially when they blink their eyes. And so they are famous for their condemnation of Lord Brahma for being such a foolish creator that he made eyes which blink and thus obstruct one's sight of Kṛṣṇa. And that split second of blinking to the gopis feels like thousands and thousands of years. Who can imagine having that level of love for someone? Even just the idea of that being possible, it's not even, I don't think it's even possible for someone to imagine or just like come up with such a thing. Atheists, scholars would say that Bhagavatam was just made up by someone, but how could you even think about like something like the descriptions of pure devotional service that we read in the Bhagavatam, or Kṛṣṇa's pastimes? And we see practically that no other theological conception of the Supreme has any kind of something that even comes close to the description of Kṛṣṇa and the depth of understanding of Kṛṣṇa that we get in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, and the Vaishnava traditions in general, but especially Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So also in regard to the experience of love and separation from Kṛṣṇa in the Bhagavatam, as we continue to read on, we will see in the beginning of the third canto how Vidura met Uddhava on the way to, that Vidura was coming back to Hastinapur. And this is after the battle of Kurukshetra. Vidura was coming to save his older brother. And we just read about that in the previous chapter. And it is described that when Vidura met with Uddhava, he asked Uddhava if Kṛṣṇa had left. Uddhava was obviously experiencing great emotions of separation from Kṛṣṇa. And so Vidura asked Uddhava many questions, just like Yudhiṣṭhira. And then he asks Vidura, did Kṛṣṇa leave? And actually, Srila Jiva Goswami says that Vidura, he actually already knew that Kṛṣṇa had left. But there was some need for psychological coping and psychological reassurance of the situation. The idea that Kṛṣṇa had left was so crazy and so so monumental that Vidura, even though he knew he had to ask Uddhava. So we see the same thing here in this chapter, or we will see that even before Arjuna arrived back from Dvarka, Yudhiṣṭhira was already thinking that all of the omens he was seeing around him must mean that Kṛṣṇa has left. After all, Narada Muni had said in the end of the previous chapter that Kṛṣṇa was about to leave. And so, but nevertheless, even though Yudhiṣṭhira knows, he spends a long time asking Arjuna about every other possible thing that he could think of as to why Arjuna was obviously so dejected, besides the inevitable and overriding reality that Kṛṣṇa was gone from this world. So Yudhiṣṭhira, just like Vidura, couldn't immediately confront the situation of Kṛṣṇa's disappearance. Yudhiṣṭhira also couldn't immediately confront this situation. And so he's asking every possible question. And in the 11th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, we are again going to see another example of a line of questioning coming up that is very similar to the line of questioning that Yudhiṣṭhira is presenting to Arjuna. Except in this case, in the 11th canto, the questions will be asked by Uddhava, and he's asking them to Kṛṣṇa directly. So this is a little bit of a different situation in that, again, Uddhava is with Kṛṣṇa, as opposed to Yudhiṣṭhira and Arjuna are gone from Kṛṣṇa. Vidura and Uddhava previously in the 3rd canto, Kṛṣṇa is already left. In this case, Uddhava is directly speaking to Kṛṣṇa, but we see that he is also experiencing this Vipralambha bhava, again in anticipation of Kṛṣṇa leaving. So most of the 11th canto consists of Kṛṣṇa instructing Uddhava, and the sage Maitreya was also hiding in a bush nearby as Kṛṣṇa was instructing Uddhava. He was listening to what Kṛṣṇa was saying. And so Kṛṣṇa instructs Uddhava in the science of devotional service and transcendental knowledge. And that section of the 11th canto makes up most of the 11th canto. It's called the Uddhava Gita. And as Kṛṣṇa is speaking the Uddhava Gita, there's one section in which Kṛṣṇa is explaining to Uddhava about the perfection of yoga, about controlling the mind, controlling the senses, being in the mode of goodness. And then suddenly Uddhava interjects into Kṛṣṇa's description of the yoga process, like right in the middle of Kṛṣṇa was like explaining something, and then all of a sudden Uddhava just like breaks into the conversation. And so and he asks a bunch of really random questions, one after another, and doesn't actually even give Kṛṣṇa time to answer these questions. So I thought that I would read this section from the 11th canto. It's 3 verses to give you an idea of what kind of state of mind Uddhava was in anticipation of Kṛṣṇa's departure. So Sri Uddhava said, "My dear Lord Kṛṣṇa," and again remember Kṛṣṇa is just talking about controlling the mind, being peaceful. So Uddhava says, "My dear Lord Kṛṣṇa, O chastiser of the enemies, please tell me how many types of disciplinary regulations and regular daily duties there are. Also, my Lord, tell me what is mental equilibrium, what is self-control, and what is the actual meaning of tolerance and steadfastness. What are charity, austerity, and heroism, and how are reality and truth to be described? What is renunciation, and what is wealth? What is desirable, what is sacrifice, and what is religious remuneration? My dear Keshava, O most fortunate one, how am I to understand the strength, opulence, and profit of a particular person? What is the best education? What is actual humility? And what is real beauty? What are happiness and unhappiness? Who is learned and who is a fool? What are the true and the false paths in life? And what are heaven and hell? Who is indeed a true friend? And what is one's real home? Who is a rich man and who is a poor man? Who is wretched and who is an actual controller? O Lord of the devotees, kindly explain these matters to me along with their opposites." So don't just explain all these things I asked about, but also the opposite. So the previous acharyas, they tell us that Uddhava was not asking all these questions just because he was interested in these things. I mean, from an objective standpoint, some of these questions are like, really don't make very much sense. Like how can we tell who is rich and who is poor. Like that seems like a pretty straightforward thing to know.
Maybe that's like spiritually rich and spiritually poor.
Yeah, so Kṛṣṇa does end up answering in that kind of a vein of thought. But
Spidey senses.
yeah, but so the previous acharyas tell us that Uddhava asked these questions simply to stall Kṛṣṇa from leaving, because he knew that once Kṛṣṇa stopped speaking the Uddhava Gita, that Kṛṣṇa was going to depart. And so in this way, even though Uddhava was personally with Kṛṣṇa and Kṛṣṇa was speaking to Uddhava, we still see that he is experiencing love and separation from Kṛṣṇa. So we can see from all these examples of the intensity of what it means to actually love Kṛṣṇa in pure devotional service. For these pure devotees, their hearts are completely tied up with Kṛṣṇa, and Kṛṣṇa is completely the center of their entire lives and their whole existence. This is especially so in the case of the gopis. It is described that the gopis offered their entire bodies to Kṛṣṇa. They bathed for Kṛṣṇa, to please Kṛṣṇa. They got dressed thinking that, how am I pleasing Kṛṣṇa? They put on their makeup to please Kṛṣṇa. They experienced happiness to please Kṛṣṇa because Kṛṣṇa was pleased by seeing them happy. They smiled to please Kṛṣṇa. Their whole activities and their entire emotions were completely dedicated to Kṛṣṇa. Now, for some transcendentalists, this emotionally gripping nature of bhakti is problematic. So, what do you guys think? Is it problematic? No.
I don't think so. I was gonna ask you, but when it's that part of how someone might misinterpret this, but because it is often brought up that these intense emotions are problematic, or that we shouldn't look or act a certain way. But I think that if it's in service to Kṛṣṇa, and that we're always anchored into that reminder, and not in a material way, and not being attached. Say it's something like makeup or whatever, right? We're not attached to that in a material sense, but we always remember the point of why we're in these moods and in this happiness, and decorating our bodies or taking care of our bodies in a certain way.
Yeah, because if gopis were here, they would do all that. They would do Sora Singar.
Well, the gopis, when they were in separation from Kṛṣṇa, after Kṛṣṇa apparently left Vrindavan, it's described that they and all the residents of Vrindavan hardly cared for themselves at all. For instance, the kitchen of Nanda Mahārāja and Mother Yashoda had cobwebs all over. They didn't even cook for themselves in separation from Kṛṣṇa. But I was thinking in a different...
Can I add something to this? I think this is the question of... I think this is the problem of God in the history of the world, period. Because there's this Indologist professor from Rutgers, Edwin Bryant, and his kind of shtick on this is it begs the question, what's a problem in the world of theology? And his claim is that they all just take you to different places. And that brought a tremendous amount of understanding. So if you want oneness, you're going to get oneness. If you want moksha, you're going to have moksha. If you want divine sweet love of Bhagavan, then you get divine sweet love of Bhagavan. And the problem is that the theologists all think of an absolute end state for theology, as opposed to they all just lead to, in some ways, the same place, but not exactly the same place. And with that nuance, I think shreds tremendous like from someone who has spent the last 27 years in San Francisco bumping into a lot of stuff, wondering if it's like, this is the thing. When I heard that, I was like, this is obvious. This is so clear. And they all go to, they take you up, they end in different places.
Yeah, so what came to my mind in regard to this question of, or the way I was thinking about, some transcendentalists have a problem with the emotional nature of bhakti, or pure bhakti, is we see an example in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, where Lord Chaitanya, on his way to Vrindavan, he visits the city of Varanasi. And in Varanasi, the prominent kind of people that you found there were Mayavadis. So the Mayavadis saw Lord Chaitanya arrive in Varanasi, and Lord Chaitanya was this beautiful young sannyasi, and whereas all these Mayavadis, they spent their time meditating and studying Vedanta Sutra, following the impersonalist explanations of Shankaracharya, and trying to achieve Brahman and trying to achieve mental equilibrium. And then they see Lord Chaitanya show up all of a sudden, and he's performing his Sankirtana movement in the streets of Varanasi. And as he's going through the streets, he's loudly chanting, which the Mayavadis don't do. He was dancing, which the Mayavadis don't do. And he was crying, which the Mayavadis also don't do. And so when they saw Lord Chaitanya doing this, their reaction, you might wish that it would be that, oh, this looks like fun, we should join in. But no, their reaction was quite the opposite. They saw Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtana movement, and they said to each other, what is this sannyasi doing, chanting and dancing in the company of fanatic sentimentalists? He should be coming with us and studying Vedanta, but instead he's carefully avoiding us and spending all his time with these emotional devotees who don't understand the real nature of the absolute truth. So they were feeling that this real knowledge of or attainment of spiritual perfection in their minds was being beyond all qualities and all emotions, because they can only understand the negation of material things. They say, okay, we're Brahman, and so then they look at like all the other things in the world and say, okay, well, that's not Brahman, that's not Brahman. And so then the conclusion that they come to is oneness or nothingness, depending on the particular tradition. But they can't understand the flip side, that as it is said in the first verse of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and actually the second verse of Vedanta Sutra, which they study, also says, Janmadyasya yataha, that the supreme absolute truth is that from which everything emanates. So if one says that there cannot be emotional experience in the supreme absolute truth, there's not personality, there's not qualities, then that means that the material nature, in a sense, is actually superior to the absolute truth. And so Srila Prabhupada explains many times this is why people who are impersonalists tend to eventually get drawn into mundane philanthropy, and why they can't maintain their, even if they do merge with Brahman, they can't maintain that position. So the Jnanis and the mystic yogis also, to a degree, they are following an ascending path of spiritual attainment, in which their spiritual growth comes from their own spiritual prowess and their capacity for increased discernment between what is matter and what is spirit. And so then they come to understand Brahman and understand themselves as being one with Brahman, which is true in a sense. but they fail to understand Parabrahman, which is Kṛṣṇa, or Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. And thus, they also fail to understand the relationship between Kṛṣṇa and his devotees. Kṛṣṇa can only be understood by someone to whom Kṛṣṇa reveals himself, and he cannot be understood simply by great austerity or philosophical study or contemplation. It's a descending path by which we can actually understand Kṛṣṇa. And in the Katha Upanishad, which interestingly is another, Shastra that Mayavadis also study, but there's a verse there which is also repeated in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, if I remember correctly. It says, Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo namedhaya na bahuna shrutena yamevaisha vrinute tena labhya tasyaisa atma vrinute tanum svam. So this means the Supreme Soul can be attained neither by scholarly study, nor by great intellect, nor by extensive hearing. To that person whom the Supreme Soul chooses, he becomes attainable. To that person, the Supreme Soul reveals his personal form. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we get a hint of, or not just a hint, but Kṛṣṇa says directly, who Kṛṣṇa chooses to reveal himself to. And that is the pure devotee. And as we advance in devotional service, we gradually become more situated in devotional service, then we become gradually more understanding of, or Kṛṣṇa reveals himself gradually more and more to us. And one example of Kṛṣṇa saying this is in Bhagavad Gita. Kṛṣṇa tells Arjuna, he says, I will share this confidential knowledge with you, Arjuna, because you are my dear devotee and my dear friend. So as Prabhupada points out in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is, said there's so many different editions of Bhagavad Gita, so many different scholars have translated Bhagavad Gita and written about Bhagavad Gita, said, but all the people who are reading these other editions of Bhagavad Gita, they fail to have a change of heart. They fail to understand Kṛṣṇa. And why is that? It's because these other people, these atheistic scholars or these impersonalists, they're not taking Bhagavad Gita in the way that Kṛṣṇa himself prescribes that Bhagavad Gita should be taken. They're thinking that just by having some intellectual analysis of these verses, by knowing Sanskrit grammar, then I can understand Bhagavad Gita. But obviously they don't understand Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita itself says, if you want to understand this, you have to be a devotee. So Srila Prabhupada points out, if you want to understand Bhagavad Gita, you have to at least theoretically be willing to concede that Kṛṣṇa is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And you have to be willing to take shelter of the instructions and the explanations of a pure devotee of Kṛṣṇa who understands the science of Kṛṣṇa properly. And again, this is also something that Kṛṣṇa says in Bhagavad Gita, that if you want to understand this transcendental science, then you should approach a spiritual master who is a knower of the truth, and you should serve him or her. You should inquire submissively, hear from him or her, and in this way you can come to understand properly. So how foolish is it that these people, they consider themselves experts on Bhagavad Gita, but they fail to take note of the very point that Bhagavad Gita says so many times in regard to what the nature of understanding Bhagavad Gita and the nature of understanding Kṛṣṇa actually is. And in this way, they miss the point and those who read their writings don't actually get the true benefit of Bhagavad Gita. Devamrta Maharaj tells a story about his experiencing with this when he was a student at Yale University. He saw in the course catalog there was a course called The Mysteries of Bhagavad Gita or something like that. He had heard of Bhagavad Gita, but he had never read it. And so he thought, that sounds great. Like, I'll enroll in this class. There's a particular impersonalist edition of Bhagavad Gita that was recommended, or that the professor said that students should read. So even before the semester started, Maharaj bought this edition, and the very first page of the book, it said, Kṛṣṇa is just an imaginary figure who appeals to the intellect of the intellectual and the emotions of the emotional. And Devamrta Maharaj says that when he read that, he immediately took the book and he threw it across the room and he threw it away in the trash, and he withdrawed from the course. And he's like, what kind of an understanding of Bhagavad Gita is this? Like, they're already negating Bhagavad Gita even before saying anything about it. So we have to understand from the nature of devotional service from the pure devotees. Thus, we're so fortunate to have the example of especially Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who showed the perfection of what it means to be a devotee. So we can all read Chaitanya Charitamrita and derive great insights and also great nectar from reading Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. There's no book like Chaitanya Charitamrita. In fact, the first time that I read it, when I got to the end of it, I couldn't stop crying for 20 minutes because Chaitanya Charitamrita was over. And so then I immediately went back to the first verse and started reading again. And in that way, I ended up reading it 6 or 7 times, just over and over. So, yes, please take advantage of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then also, that will give so much insights into Srimad-Bhagavatam. There was never a point that I appreciated Bhagavatam more than after reading Chaitanya Charitamrita. Some of our acharyas say that one can understand Chaitanya Charitamrita in a sense as a commentary on Srimad-Bhagavatam. It gives the essence, the essential understanding and teachings and application of the knowledge of Bhagavatam. And then if we understand that, then it makes it easier to be able to read Bhagavatam and not get overloaded by all the different episodes that come up and all the different characters, personalities that are mentioned. And in this way, we can really cling on to the essence. So I'll stop there. And if there's any questions or comments or complaints.
It was recommended to me, and I want to know your experience because you've read it so many times, to read Srimad-Bhagavatam first and then Chaitanya. And why, and what was your experience of maybe not doing that?
Yeah, well, I guess to be clear, I had read most of Srimad-Bhagavatam before reading Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, and also Bhagavad Gita, Sri Upanishad, etc., Nectar of Instruction. But, and Srila Prabhupada, he said that also. He said that Bhagavad Gita is primary school, and then Srimad Bhagavatam is college and graduate study, and then Chaitanya Charitamrita is postgraduate study, because Chaitanya Charitamrita gives us the most confidential understanding of Kṛṣṇa, which is Krishna's relationship with his pure devotees and his pure devotees' relationships with him and their emotional experience of that. and then that culminates in the highest level of love for Kṛṣṇa as exhibited by Srimati Radharani, which Lord Chaitanya relishes in the most like extraordinary pastimes. Like there were so many times where I was biking home from work and I was listening to Chaitanya Charitamrita on my headphones, and like I would have to pull over on the side of the road because it was just like so, what it was describing about Lord Chaitanya was just so emotionally charged and like inconceivable. And so I would just have to like sit on the side of the road for like half an hour while I finished the chapter, and then I would listen to a kirtan so I could make it home. So yes, there is truth. It is true that Srimad-Bhagavatam is introductory to the points of Chaitanya Charitamrita. But on the other hand, I think that humbly, if we read Adi Lila and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gives his description of what inspired him to write Chaitanya Charitamrita, and there's one point where he actually says that some people come to me about Chaitanya Charitamrita and they criticize me because there's so many Sanskrit verses in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So how is a common person supposed to understand this? And his answer is, well, first of all, Srimad-Bhagavatam is also full of Sanskrit verses, and people read that. So that was his first answer. And then his second answer was, but I have given these verses with translation in the Bengali vernacular, in the common language of my audience. And so in this way, anyone can read Chaitanya Charitamrita and understand it if they approach it with the right mentality, a mentality of love and devotion and faith in Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya also, by his mercy, it is possible for us to approach Kṛṣṇa. It is possible for us to approach the pure devotees. It's possible for us to engage in Sankirtana. And so I would argue that there is perhaps a place for or a way in which one could say that reading Chaitanya Charitamrita allows for one to properly understand Srimad-Bhagavatam, and also that it's imperative for us to understand Lord Chaitanya as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Actually, there was about 10 years ago a survey done of GBC members to find out about their how much they read every day. And it turned out that most of the members of the GBC had never read Chaitanya Charitamrita.
What?
And these are devotees who have been they've been practicing devotional service for like 40 plus years. So yeah, it's insane. So let's not be like that. We can find some time to read.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So, yeah. So take that for what you will. Of course, take the instructions of your superiors. But
we should all send letters to the GBC and say, dear GBC, can you pause all mundane activities of your board and read the
It takes like 6
CC?
months to read the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita if they just like focused on it.
yeah. So, yeah, we should understand Lord Chaitanya as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Otherwise, I don't know what kind of Gaudiya Vaishnavas we are. And it will give us so much insights in our practical insights. I always have situations come up where something happens or I'm uncertain about something. And it's, oh, well, Srila Raghunath Goswami had this similar situation and he responded like this. Lord Chaitanya responded like this in this other situation. So, even like on a very practical level, it's very beneficial. Anything else?
Can I just say one
Yeah.
last quick thing? And I've said this a couple times already, but my favorite explanation of a devotee talking about like emotions is Her Grace Sukhava Devidasi on the podcast, the Devamrta podcast, and she said that emotions, like we're meant to experience emotions in the material world because they prepare us for spiritual life. So that was like a really nice, it stuck with me, and I bring it often into classes, and I'm like, yeah, that makes it like we're supposed to experience them. They're not bad, and they prepare us for spiritual life, which clearly, like as we're reading every day, is so emotional, and the devotion to Kṛṣṇa by pure devotees is like the most emotional of all. So
And to add on that, if there are negative emotions, like how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he went to Banarasi, you quote unquote, you said carefully avoiding the Mayavadis. Like, we can do that as well, like carefully avoiding, like not just ignoring, but carefully, selectively avoiding negative.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I would like to ask, would you recommend any? I was thinking of like some overview or something, some CC overview, maybe in a video on YouTube I could listen to.
The teachings of Lord Chaitanya. That's a summary study of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And that book really dives into like the essence of Lord Chaitanya's movement, even like from the very first page of teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And it, by the end, describes the highest experience of ecstasy by Srimati Radharani. So you really get the A to Z. I remember the first time that I read teachings of Lord Chaitanya, I was actually taking the bus back from distributing books as I read the last chapter. I remember thinking, like, how are we distributing this book, like, to people, like, out on the streets? Like, it goes into so much depth about Radharani's, like, loving exchanges with Kṛṣṇa. Things that like I hear most devotees like avoid talking about like in a public context, but we give this out. So it's very, very deep. And Srila Prabhupada actually released teachings of Lord Chaitanya before Kṛṣṇa book, if I remember properly. So also in regard to reading Chaitanya Charitamrita before Bhagavatam, if you look at what did Prabhupada lecture on in the beginning, the first 2 years, it was almost exclusively Chaitanya Charitamrita. During the first period that he was in San Francisco in 1967, every lecture he gave was on Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, take that as you will. All right, Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.